Um, let me begin by thanking Val for the invitation and to be able to making it possible for me to come to Whitehorse, which was a great thing. We did the Nunavut Summit on the Social Economy in November last year, and it was a tremendous experience. It's one of the first meetings of its type that had taken place in Nunavut, and it has stimulated a lot of activity there in the year since. What I'm going to talk about, or at least the subject that I have to talk about today, which you can't see projected up on the screen there, it's called the importance of the social economy in the North. I have to begin by saying a couple of things first, and one is that what I'm going to talk about is not really based on research as such, but on practice, which might make this presentation a little bit different from those that have preceded me, and maybe some will follow. The second thing about this presentation, although despite the title, I don't really presume to know what's happening in the social economy in the North, even if I knew where the North was. So I'm going to speak to you about what we're doing in Nunavut on a particular project, and I'm going to hope that from that we can perhaps learn something that will have more general application where you live in the other two territories or in Labrador. So this presentation has sort of 3 or 4 sections to it. I want to talk about what the government of Nunavut's agenda is currently, which is a really hot topic, hotter than you may realize today. In fact, the government leader, Premier Ariak, is having her leadership reviewed in the Legislative Assembly. Well, this is a normal thing. It's done at the midway point in our government's term. However, it has been moved up at the request of the people who elected her premier. Those are members of the Legislative Assembly. And so it's kind of a stressful time in Nunavut while we wait to see if Premier Ariak and her remarkable agenda will be able to continue through to the end of this government's term. I was talking with somebody this morning because, of course, we're 3 hours behind here, and they've already started the debate, and I was told that the Premier was challenged by one of the members to identify her 3 priorities for the coming 2.5 years of her mandate, should she be permitted to continue and to exercise that mandate. And the first thing she said was, we're going to eliminate poverty. And so no pressure on in terms of the work that we're doing. It's just the whole government of Nunavut hangs in the balance here. The TMAPTA action plan is what that mandate is called. And the best way to describe it is the mandate has primarily a social and cultural focus. There are a whole series of problems that have been identified, or I'm going to call them problems. I guess we should call them strategic priorities that have been identified by the government for Nunavut. You won't find the development of the Nunavut economy among them, which is what we normally expect from government. Instead, you'll find things like improve education and training outcomes, reduce poverty, connect our community, it's called, which is essentially about social inclusion, increase housing options, support for culture and the arts, helping those at risk in our communities, addressing social concerns at their roots. And there are others, but you get the idea. The government has determined to seek a different type of agenda in its current mandate, which runs from 2009 to 2013. It's very much focused on social and cultural outcomes. The reason for this is essentially, I think that in important ways, the economy in Nunavut is taking care of itself. While we've experienced the impact of the recession like everybody else, our growth didn't appear, the GDP didn't go into negative numbers. It was in 2008, I think, about 9% or maybe a little more than that, and we expect it to be up in that range again, and it's because the resource development industries in Nunavut are doing extremely well. So our issues are not around opportunities for jobs or business development or so on. Our issues lie around equal access to those opportunities, and that triggers an agenda for the government in the social and cultural realm. Now, the main characteristic about these things is that they are what we might call complex problems. I read a definition of complex problems that I was going to put up there, so I'm going to read it to you. And it says, it describes them or defines them in this way. Some problems are so complex that you have to be highly intelligent and well-informed just to be undecided about them. And that's where we are when we tackle something like poverty. It's often defined, as you probably heard this term as well, as a wicked problem, and it means essentially that it's not only difficult to define, but in order to decide what to do about it, you kind of have to just start. You almost have to start with a solution before you really know what the problem is. Get into the process, and then see what you can do about it, see what you learn, and it's a constant process of feedback and learning and trying again. There's a lot of failure involved in trying to deal with complex problems. The solutions, of course, can be very expensive, and you often create new problems when you try to deal with the one that you started with. And the biggest point about complex problems is simply that no one or no agency or no organization can solve a complex problem acting alone. I'm going to have to watch the time. I can go on, and but I'm presuming I have the time that's left, eh? Okay. That's your problem. So the main point here about complex problems is simply that they have to be dealt with collaboratively. And when our government, with its TMAPTA mandate, took on poverty reduction, along with all these other things, but we'll just focus on poverty reduction because that's my job. It did specify for us how it wanted to address the problem. It recognized that it had to be done collaboratively, and I'm sorry, I'm going to read again from the TMAPTA action plan. On how the direction it provided for us in terms of working in poverty reduction. It says, in the spirit of working together and recognizing that poverty in Nunavut cannot be addressed by any one organization, the government of Nunavut will actively engage its partners, including Inuit organizations, other governments, non-governmental organizations, and our business community, in the development of programs and policies to support Nunavummiut in their efforts at eliminating poverty. So that's about as far as they go in terms of being specific. So, but at least the essential method for dealing with a complex problem like poverty has been identified, and that's collaborative. What it doesn't say is exactly what government's role is going to be in that. And the important point that we realized very quickly was that whatever the process was going to be, government wasn't going to be able to control it even if that was desirable, which it is not. And so we had to recognize that government alone cannot solve the poverty problem, and we need others to work on it as well. And this essentially has led us to what called sometimes the community approach to dealing with a complex public policy issue. We've drawn a lot on the work of the Public Policy Forum, an NGO in Ottawa, who talk a lot or write a lot about what's sometimes called holistic policy development, which is based on the principles that good public policy must be comprehensive, it requires public participation, and that every community is different when you come to applying that policy. In fact, perhaps the policy itself must be different according to where you are located. And in Nunavut, of course, we have 25 of these locations. So it's not just a matter of trying to figure out where the north is. We really need to figure out where Nunavut is. And where it is in 25 very different locations, and our policy on poverty must reflect that. Now, excuse me, the challenges that we face with the community approach are probably already quite apparent. The work has to be done locally. It can't be directed from the center. Another hard thing for the government to get its head around. It requires the participation of a broad range of organizations and individuals as partners. When I say partners, I do mean partners as decision makers, as co-decision makers. One main point I want to make here is that many of these organizations and individuals and communities are actually somewhat hidden. They don't necessarily participate in formal networks or systems. And where these formal networks or systems do exist, they're very poorly resourced, and they may have a great deal of difficulty in participating as partners on a major public policy effort like this. So new resources are needed to support these organizations, and in particular to support implementation of whatever policy we might come up with. And when I'm talking about resources, I'm talking in terms of social capital as much as in terms of just straight funding. My next slide, I regret, isn't going up there because it's entitled The Persistence of Informal Systems. And this is, I'm not sure really if that even means anything to anyone. Informal is in quotation marks. The reason being is that we kind of take the status quo or the way we do things from the South as formal, and so everybody else is informal. It means that the challenge that we face in trying to work on public policy with partners based in communities, it's much different, or at least it's more than simply what we usually call community capacity building. Our biggest challenge, this is what we're learning, is to, and this is after living in the North for 20-odd years and living in communities in Nunavut during that time, that our main challenge is really to honor and to learn to work with these informal community-based systems, which are based fundamentally on traditional Inuit governance systems, and which are, I'm afraid, necessarily in conflict with the systems that we use now in government and that we are, in a sense, imposing in government. And I'm talking about Nunavut here. I'm talking about a post-so-called colonial government. One that is actually supposed to be the manifestation of post-colonialism and is celebrated for that. So the mainstream understanding that we have of these Inuit government systems we're discovering is extremely poor. There has been work done on the informal or the traditional economy, and that's where a lot of this has been focused, and that's been a personal interest of mine for years. But we're only just beginning to accept the social and the cultural systems that exist in Nunavut communities and to begin to understand their potential and to realize, accept what it is they're actually doing out there. we're still a long ways from stopping to what we normally do in government, which is government seems to continually try to replace these informal systems, whether we're talking social, cultural, or economics. We're constantly finding ourselves in conflict with them, denying them either through just plain ignorance and not being aware of it, or actually trying to subvert these systems. Okay, I'm going to have to go quickly here. I'm going to be on I hope a panel this afternoon, because even if I could show it to you, I don't have a formal presentation prepared for this afternoon or later this morning, whenever it is. But at that time, maybe we can talk a bit about what the methodology might be that we would use to work on a public policy issue like poverty, given the challenges that I've tried to describe a little bit. The method we're going to use is public engagement, and I'll get into that, I guess, later today. The one thing I do want to say right now is that something that's becoming a major issue in Nunavut is Article 32 of the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. Well, we may not have been thinking about this problem 20 years ago. A lot of people who were involved in settling the claim with the Government of Canada and the Government of the Northwest Territories. And in Article 32, that states that Inuit have the right to participate in the design of social and cultural programs and services. These are government social and cultural programs and services, including their method of delivery. And so that's kind of the grenade that's been thrown into the room, and we're sort of waiting to see when it will go off, or can we deal with it first. So the last thing I'll mention here, the second last thing I'll mention, is just sort of how then will we know if we've accomplished anything? What will the outcomes be if we tackle poverty from this perspective? And I will just list a number of questions for you that we're asking ourselves about this that I found useful in assessing what we're doing. And they essentially come to having us try to identify whether or not we're able to find in communities the actors who are already working on a major public policy issue, in this case, poverty reduction. We need to know if we've acknowledged and engaged community organizations that already exist, who are already working on poverty reduction. We need to know if we've helped to strengthen them in any way within the community and to strengthen the relationships between these organizations in the community. Have we created conditions in which so that their point of view can be heard on this public policy issue, particularly those who have lived experience of the actual problem? And have we contributed to a general expansion of awareness of the problem in the community? Have we created, or will we be able to create or support the development of some sort of ongoing community forum to deal with this poverty reduction issue? And ultimately, we're going to have to ask ourselves if we've been able to get the resources to support this, and have we placed the communities in control of those resources to do something about the problem. So in terms of the importance of the social economy, and what I've talked about, my conclusions would be these. The achievement of major public policy objectives like poverty reduction depends on actors on actors with whom we can partner in the social economy in communities. The capacity in the social economy to be a partner is apparently limited, and we hear this all the time. You want to do something with the non-governmental sector, they're too weak, they can't really be a proper partner. But I think this view is based in part on a failure to recognize and understand informal social and economic community-based systems. It's not necessarily that they're weak, it's just that we, for whatever reason, can't see them. So these systems are often hidden and may be denied by current public policy and discouraged from participating in problem solving. However, the role of the social economy is so important to the achievement of current public policy objectives, and particularly to the agenda that we have in Nunavut, that two things are going to happen, and I feel optimistically will happen. One is that we're going to have to learn to eliminate the conflict between community and government. And I would say when I talk about government, that not only includes a conflict between government and the community, but a conflict between the governance structure that Inuit organizations use centrally through Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, in our case, the land claim organization, and communities. A similar type of conflict exists. Conflicts between the business community and the community itself. We're going to have to learn to eliminate these conflicts and to work with the actors in the social economy. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, we've got to find ways to support the social economy in Nunavut. And I think we will, because if we are going to make the Nunavut project work, we have to make progress in the social and cultural areas. And if we're going to make progress in those areas, then we are going to need the actors in the social economy in our communities as full-fledged partners. That's my presentation. Thank you.